Hi, I'm Dennis with TeraFlex. You know, we've been getting a lot of questions lately about our new full float conversion and locking hub kit. You know, questions like, well, is it some way to make my Jeep float? Or is it a new locking system so no one can steal my front axle? Or what exactly is a full float kit? Or why do I even need it? You hear that, kid? That's the school bell ringing. You're about to learn all about locking hubs and the full float axle conversion. You know, when we were building the Harbinger, it was going to SEMA. So I could have had any axles I wanted under it. But the Harbinger is a purpose-built Jeep. It's an overland rig. So I didn't really want the extra weight of a 60, and I didn't really need the extra strength that a 60 would offer. I did, however, want the Jeep to be built well enough that it would get me there and back home. So on the front, I chose to use our TeraFlex heavy-duty 44 axle housing, just to get rid of all those common bending problems that the stock housing has. But I also added our locking hub kit to it. On the rear, I just kept the stock factory 44 axle housing, but I did add TeraFlex's new full float conversion kit to it. But it also includes TeraFlex's big brake kit on the front and our big rotor kit on the rear. The vastly improved stopping power is just yet another benefit of doing the conversion. This, friends, is one of the saddest sights we have here at TeraFlex, our JK axle graveyard. Stacks of bent and broken JK semi-float axle shafts, each with a painful story. Each broken and bent shaft is a monument to a disrupted trip. Another wallet impacting financial drain, a witness to words that should have never been uttered, let alone screamed in rage. Yes, it's an emotional memorial to the semi-float axle. When we say full float or even semi-float axle, we're actually referring to the axle shaft in the differential. The Jeep JK Wrangler normally comes equipped from the factory with a semi-float axle design. The semi-float axle uses a single bearing that's pressed onto the shaft. The design tasks the axle shaft with carrying all of the Jeep's weight, in addition to its rotating the tire for forward motion duties. Now that's a lot to ask of a 30 or even a 32 spline axle shaft. And that's exactly why they're so prone to bending. When that axle bends, that's when you start to get that squeak, squeak, squeak as that brake caliper tries to keep up with the rotor as the tire rotates. It's common. If you've heard it, you know what it is. With TeraFlex's full float axle design, 100% of the Jeep's weight is carried by a 4140 chrome moly spindle that uses two 3/4 ton truck bearings. The axle shaft is floating in the sense that it carries no vehicle weight. With no weight on the axle shaft, a bent shaft or a wobbling tire are now a thing of the past. High-speed impacts, low-range binding, and large tire leveraging are no longer a concern. Now to review, a full float axle is one that carries no vehicle weight. Remember, the original equipment axles use a single axle bearing that's pressed onto the shaft to support the weight of the Jeep. The TeraFlex full float kit uses two off-the-shelf, zero-maintenance, oil-bathed 3/4 ton truck axle bearings that spread the load across a nearly indestructible 4140 chrome moly spindle. That spindle carries all the weight of the Jeep, not the axle shaft. In fact, the axle shaft can be completely removed with the Jeep sitting on the ground. Now that being said, the 4140 chrome moly axle shafts that are supplied with our full float conversion kit are in and of themselves a substantial upgrade over the stock axle shafts. When all of the vehicle weight and side loads are removed from the axle shaft, you have just vastly decreased the axle's failure rate. By the way, the tone rings and speed sensors are completely sealed away from exposure to, Jeeper-induced environmental conditions. Well, that's the full float axle conversion story. Let's move to the front and talk locking hubs. Locking hubs are a great upgrade for your Jeep, and there are plenty of benefits. The factory unit bearing design is really hard-pressed to support the large tires and heavy loads that we throw at our Jeeps. The locking hub design replaces the factory unit bearing with a bring on the load 4140 chrome moly spindle, just like on the rear, and another set of those 3/4 ton off the shelf wheel bearings, as well as the unique to TeraFlex wheel speed sensor design that's completely protected from the elements. So by just turning TeraFlex's new slim lock hub, what you've done is you've just completely disconnected the entire axle assembly, the U-joints and so forth, from the wheel and tire. When you did that, it also made it so that the ring and pinion is no longer turning inside the differential. Normally, even while driving in two-wheel drive on the highway, the front driveline on the JK is continuously turning. One of the greatest benefits of TeraFlex's locking hub conversion is that the front driveline is no longer turning when the hubs are unlocked. When we lift our Jeeps, the driveline angle is increased. That steep angle at high RPMs generates a lot of heat and wear and tear on the driveline's U-joints or factory Rosetta joints. You just got through eliminating a lot of fuel-consuming resistance. You know, when we were designing the locking hub conversion, we determined that the locking hub assembly was too large to fit in a 5-on-5 bolt pattern. What that says is on a JK, you've got 5 wheel studs and they're in a 5-inch circle. It at least needed to be 5-on-5.5. Well, if you're gonna buy new wheels, let's go big. The massive 8-on-6.5-inch bolt pattern is strong and allows for massive 3/4 ton wheel bearings and huge 9/16-inch wheel studs and off-the-shelf components in the kit. We've all been there. That sickening pop, followed by every head in the Jeep turning and looking at you and asking, what was that? Was it the ring and pinion? Was it an axle joint? Maybe even your driveline came apart. How are you gonna get it home without doing some major surgery? If you drive it home like it is, you could do further damage. It's easy. Just turn out the TeraFlex locking hub. With that hub disconnected, your axles are no longer connected to the wheel and tire, so they're not turning. If your axles aren't turning, your ring and pinion isn't turning, and your driveline isn't turning. It's not a problem any longer. You can drive home with confidence that you're not going to be damaging any parts. The kit will eliminate some very common trip-ending parts failures. High-speed driveline failures, rear axle bending, those are just two of the really common Jeep ailments that the kit will correct. But when you add the increased strength of the chrome moly shafts and the front locking hub's fuel savings, the advantages of the kit really start to add up. You know, we work our Jeeps pretty hard. It's nice to know that TeraFlex is there to get us back home.